The following cryptic testimony was transcribed from a handwritten note found at the scene of a developing mystery. It was discovered at the abandoned property of a missing local man. The lengthy, 6-page message makes fanciful claims of supernatural beings stalking and threatening the Bell Harbor Township fiction writer. It was found wrapped around a tape measure of all things, and lying on his hallway floor. Forensic analysis confirmed the handwriting is his, but authorities point to the bizarre descriptions and philosophical nature of the letter. To them, the overly imaginative tone casts serious doubts about his narrative. They suspect the missing man invented the nail-biting tale as a clever publicity hoax, or has suffered from a psychotic breakdown, and is in hiding somewhere. The case is still listed as unsolved at this time. It begins as follows: from the moment we exit the womb, we learn to associate our needs with delivering an ear-piercing shriek. That demand for immediate attention is broadcast to anyone who might hear it. A scream is the most primal form of expression. It's deeply embedded in our DNA. Our caregivers attend to our hunger or personal distress because they're specifically attuned to this signal. It's universal. As we grow up, however, a far more nuanced range of vocalizations develop. Once we are full-grown adults, higher reasoning steps in. It better governs our actions and behavior. Maturity replaces primal reflexes to react immediately, with rationality and a calmer demeanor. Eventually, the idea of screaming like a small child feels juvenile and immature. We do our best to resist the urge to panic or cry out. Only when experiencing the highest levels of emotional distress do we succumb to this elemental reaction. In those rare moments, we revert back to the earliest stages of life and hope some empathetic person within earshot comes to our aid. Added by the Star-Ledger editor, then his handwritten screed shifts focus dramatically, mid-sentence. The irony is rich that I'm sharing this horrific experience on the same pages as my unfinished essay about primal screams. In this case, however, I've come full circle. I've screamed until there is no more left within me. No other emotion or state of being exists inside, and no sound of any kind will ever escape again from my seized-up orifice. My vocal cords are shredded. I'm hoarse and raw with adrenaline fatigue and fright. My lungs are shriveled away in blackened atrophy from this diabolical ordeal. The ability to verbalize such a fragile state has thankfully ceased, but my brain continues to internally writhe in terror and spiraling dread. Only a calm facade remains as a defense mechanism to defend against these festering souls who would do me grievous bodily harm, if they could only reach me. I fear they will soon succeed. Their infernal growls and incessant clawing will eventually breach my makeshift barricade, and all that will be left afterward is this hastily penned account of my doom. The sole reason for my silent scream paralysis is the subject of this sinister ordeal. I bought myself a fixer-upper project in the country. As a younger man, I was decent enough with a hammer and felt I could handle a modest home repair and renovation. I understand the rudiments of structure and construction. My grasp of math and geometry is excellent. The house is in good shape overall, for a dwelling of its considerable age and price range. Both the foundation and roof are solid. As far as I knew, it only needed a few simple things updated, here and there. I believed it required mostly cosmetic or light repair work. I didn't know the basement held some hidden portal to the abyss of hell. I took 3 weeks off from regular job and set out to make this accursed place my own. A major home repair chain delivered construction supplies last Saturday morning and left them in a convenient pile beside the house. I covered the materials with a plastic tarp and spent all afternoon planning the best course of action. After several unproductive hours, I realized I was procrastinating and dragging my feet. Since the house wasn't going to restore itself, I begrudgingly motivated myself to get started. The staircase leading down to the basement is creaky and steep. It is the textbook definition of a rickety death trap. The stairs would have never met the county building code if the inspector looked at them. I wasn't so concerned about legal matters, being so far away from the city, but I didn't want to slip and fall to the bottom. It's a long way down here to the pit of death. I realized that's actually a blessing. Thank heavens for that. The home repair outlet offered professionally made stringers, created for any number of steps. I elected to delegate that precision task to them. I carried my toolbox and the prefab stair parts down the steps, set up a work light and placed my stepladder on the basement floor. Once the old staircase lumber was removed, the ladder would be the only way of getting back up to the top. That is, until the new stringers and treads were installed. Having a ladder down here with me was intended as an emergency backup, in case something went wrong. Boy, did it ever. I had no idea how wrong it could become. My instincts about replacing the stairs were solid. As a matter of fact, that was about the only thing which was solid. The steps were rotten to such an advanced degree that they could have given away at any time. Looking back on that realization in hindsight, instantly plummeting to my death would have been infinitely preferable to the unspeakable fate I've resigned myself to, here in the dark. I didn't notice them at first. I doubt anyone would. They are masterfully camouflaged among the shadows which inhabit dark, windowless basements around the world, I suppose. This one, however, holds far worse things than unsightly spiders or mice. I stood among the angry dead, painfully oblivious. Carried away in my foolish zeal to rip down the rickety steps and in doing so, removing the ability to escape. The old stringers came off the main support beams with no resistance. That initial good fortune was foreshadowing irony of unpleasant things to come. I dragged the nearly intact, decaying staircase structure to the back corner of the room to be out of my way. I planned to disassemble it later and use it for firewood. Then I placed my ladder against the edge of the wall to inspect the joint connection area. There was no sense in attaching new stringers to supporting points on the wall if it was rotten. I was pleased to find that the wall felt solid and sturdy. Then my halogen shop light began to flicker behind me. The extension cord was plugged into an outlet upstairs and must have been pulled partially out of the socket. There is no electricity in the basement and the ladder wouldn't reach the landing. It flickered again and went out. I silently cursed myself for choosing a dark hole in the ground to begin my renovation efforts. There was a flashlight in my old toolbox, but in the deep abyss of the cellar, I had to stumble around to locate it. Instead, I tripped over something very large on the floor. I assumed it was the old staircase, but by my mental calculations, it should have been much further away at the edge of the room. I reached down to feel it. The unknown object which caused me to faceplant wasn't hard like old step timbers. It was organically soft, very cold, and slowly slithering away. As soothing as it might have been to dismiss the object on the floor as an ordinary wild animal seeking shelter in the undisturbed darkness, I knew better. The horrendous death stench emanating directly from it was that of advanced putrefaction. That was my first, involuntary scream, but it certainly wouldn't be my last. Even in the panic of the moment, I realized the irrational folly of screaming in a darkened cellar, miles from the nearest neighbor. There was no one else around to hear my cry. It was a subconscious slip, back into the realm of elemental fear I mentioned above, in my unfinished essay. Only the faintest glimmer of daylight reached the basement from an upstairs window, through the open cellar doorway. Knowing what I know now, it would have been better if the stairwell door was fully closed. Sometimes being able to see is worse than not seeing at all. After my blood-curdling shriek of insanity faded, I heard numerous things shuffle and scurry about. I wasn't alone, that much was clear. There were many undesirable things in the basement. My first instinct was to stay perfectly still like a yearling deer cowering in the forest to elude a lurking predator, but that was an ineffective strategy. Whatever rotting souls accompanied me in the dark knew I was there. They surely had ears. From the top rung of my ladder I might have been able to stretch and reach the landing threshold to pull myself up, but that would have left me vulnerable. Fear and minimalist principles kept me in a still, safe, fetal position on the floor. My heartbeat thumped violently in my chest. Countless companion screams were stifled in lieu of playing it cool, but I knew my artificially calm demeanor wasn't fooling anyone, or anything. My eyes adjusted somewhat to the lack of illumination. I saw vague, muted shapes all around me. Most of it was the discarded cellar junk I was familiar with. I'd planned to sell those things to antique shops, or to burn them in the fireplace. It was the other things which hadn't been present earlier, which caused me to tremble and whimper uncontrollably. They were unfathomably black shapes of madness, standing prone, and moving about freely around the fringes of the expanse. I searched for a weapon. Anything would do in a pinch. My toolbox had many items which could be used to repel the half-dozen nightmares lurking nearby, but it was over in the corner beside the discarded staircase. I wasn't about to move toward it, with them being close. Especially since they were keeping their distance, for the time being. I didn't want to rock the boat and make things worse. Hopefully we had an understanding, but I had no idea if the uncomfortable stalemate would last. Slowly they inched closer until I felt I had to act. I yelled for them to back off and leave me alone. Breaking the chilling silence temporarily pushed them to retreat slightly, but it was a short-lived, unsustainable reprieve. Almost immediately they rebounded until I could smell their rank, decomposing corpses closing in. They were testing the waters, and the more I reacted in terrified fear, the braver they became. Either that, or they sadistically fed on my emotional distress. If so, they definitely had an early banquet snack, long before the actual feast of my flesh. I can feel their hunger in the air. These unholy denizens of evil haven't eaten in a long time. Their eyes are cold and lifeless, yet their fangs and gnashing teeth are bared and ready to sink deep into my skin. I kept my back to the wall for a long time so I didn't have to worry about sabotage from behind, but it was a short-term solution. The fact they hadn't yet rushed toward me was only of modest comfort. They inched their way closer until I had to make a break for it. My eyes acclimated to the darkness and I could make out more of their ghoulish features at last. I wished I hadn't. Another scream erupted from my agape maw. They were possibly human in a past lifetime, but now resemble unholy demons which should not be. As much as I craved the relative safety of escape, I didn't believe I could grab the ladder and place it at the base of the upstairs landing in time. They were too close for me to shimmy my way up. It was just too far. I feared I would slip and fall, and the thought of unconscious vulnerability was unbearable. Instead my brain hatched an alternative plan. One which I suspect will eventually lead to my demise. I raced toward the toolbox and grabbed it like it was a pot of gold. Luckily the lid was open and I pulled out a claw hammer and screwdriver. One of the undead grabbed my arm so I defensively swung the hammer. It made contact with a sickening thud. I released a guttural battle cry while repeated smashed its rotting face. I guess they can still feel pain. The corpse let out an unholy screech which sent icy shivers down my back. I jabbed it in the milky eye socket until it collapsed into a decomposing heap with pus and festering fluids oozing out. Then I used my temporarily gained momentum to sprint for the corner. My poorly conceived idea was to lift up the old staircase and crawl behind it. When stacked up against the wall beside some old furniture already in place, it created a safety pocket for me to hold up inside. I positioned everything carefully to insulate and create a buffer zone. It's hardly an impenetrable fortress and I am trapped here, but for now they can't reach me. Once I made the break for the corner, the unspoken truce was over. They scrambled toward me surprisingly fast. I found that they do not like bright flashlight beams shine toward them. I pulled out my notepad and started frantically journaling about these events. It's both cathartic and bittersweet to realize I probably won't make it out of this crisis. Hopefully my story will be known. That is, if I can toss these pages upstairs somehow. My dead tormentors tug and pull constantly on the tangled jumble of bookshelves, rocking chairs, and the old staircase protecting me. If they get through, I'm a dead man, but the handicap of fear has left me. A man can only scream so many times. I fought back with pride and valor, and will destroy any possibility of them ever getting upstairs to the outside world. I'll not go down without a fight. The Star-Ledger summary, that was the end of his testimony. Police have searched the premises thoroughly but found no trace of the missing man. If you have any information about his whereabouts, please contact the authorities at the Belle Harbor Township Police Headquarters immediately.